Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2. Testing, testing. Please let me know in the live chat if I am coming through okay. If the sound is good, if the video is good, let me know. But I think this will be an interesting stream. If you hear my daughter screaming, I apologize. She is testing her lungs lately for sure, but she's happy, so that's what's matters, I guess. So, not even I guess, that is what matters. But um, uh, this is going to be a stream on the mathematical constraints of creation. And I have done a video about this topic in 2020, one of the first videos that was put up on this channel. And this one is going to be live. I'm sure this will not be the last stream on this topic, but as it is an important one, but I have not spoken about it in a while, and so I think that it might be an interesting one to talk about. So, what we are going to discuss is a specific model that I have that I made in 2020 that is an attempt to showcase the logical constraints and the mathematical constraints of creation by God of the universe. And this seems like it would be an extremely difficult thing when you hear it, you're like, there's no way that that's possible to even lay out there. And I understand that reaction, but we're going to talk about why it's actually super simple. The closer you get to fundamentality, the simpler things get. It gets to a point where it's so simple that it's kind of difficult to conceptualize because it's different than in everything else that we normally do. It's simpler than everything else that we normally do. But if you think about it, you're going to the beginning of quantities. So there isn't even complex math involved, but there is very specific math that I believe is inevitable, that is associated with the beginning of this process. So we're going to talk about it. And we're going to talk about kind of how this model came to be a little bit as well. So let me open this up. Also, if you are interested in any, having me answer any questions, or you have anything that you'd like me to clarify, please post it into the live chat if you are live. If you're not live, then you can comment it down below. I do read every comment, and I try to at least. But every now and then I look back and it seems like a video has a bunch of views that I didn't realize it got, and a bunch of comments. But I try to go back through them. So go ahead and comment if you have anything that you'd like to add. So also, please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm, and so does commenting and sharing. And it just, if you find this content meaningful, it helps. So let's get to this. This is the model that we're going to discuss right here. And this is kind of the latest version of this, but this was the original. And it looks crazy, and I get that. But it's just important to save, I feel like, your work as you go, not just have the polished product, but also have the kind of work in progress. This, is the one that I go through when you look at the original video that I put up, I believe, but this is kind of a more polished model. But it's the same exact thing, and it has the same exact equations in it, and we'll discuss it. So here we go. So years ago, back to the beginning of this, in 2020, I was thinking about, I had already come up with a couple of different models of this work. I had already come up with the 4 primary perspectives of inside, outside, separate, and oneness, and I had already come up with this model that I call the quantum of consciousness, essentially, which those 2 models are these right here. This one, which is just 4 what I call primary perspectives that are entangled with each other, and the perception of one of them entails the perception of all four of them simultaneously. You can't perceive that which is separate from you without perceiving that which is one with you, and you can't perceive that which is outside of you without perceiving that which is inside of you, and you can't distinguish inside and outside without distinguishing separate and oneness. So they're all co-defining. So inside means separate and oneness, outside means separate from oneness, etc., etc. I've gone through it many times on here, but then that led to this, which is kind of this model of information generation from one, and it's kind of simultaneous calculation, which is simultaneous multiplication and addition. That's what's happening here. And to the point where you kind of get this self-reflective property of the computation, essentially, which is basically what consciousness is. But then one day I wanted to see, would I be able to think about the beginning of the universe? Because I was watching a stream, and I forgot which one it was, but it's, it was just a physics stream, and you watch all these streams from Sean Carroll, Brian Keating, any physicist out there that you can name, and they talk about cosmology, and they try and think about how the universe began, and you hear this, we have the Big Bang model, which this isn't actually really, I don't think, much of a model. It is kind of the idea that the universe has expanded, and it's painted to the public, at least. I'm not saying that there isn't, detailed math involved with some of the calculations that are responsible for certain, I guess, metrics that are stated, or numbers that are stated for the age of the universe is this many years old, and what is it, 14.7, something like that, 14 billion years old, they say. And I think that none of this is actual cosmology, because it's not fundamental cosmology. And you cannot do fundamental cosmology while looking through a telescope, because a telescope is a device that is created within space-time, which is relativity, the context of relativity, that is designed to look at things that are also within the context of space-time or relativity. So you're not at a fundamental level when you're trying to use telescopes in order to do anything, really. I'm not saying you can't tie any of this to fundamental cosmology. Ideally, if you're onto something, you should be able to do that. But that's first, I believe first you have to kind of get to fundamental cosmology, which is, in order to do this, you have to step outside of relativity. And that was kind of part of what this project was involved, which is those four primary perspectives allow you to orient within multiplicity, but beyond relativity. So inside, outside, separate, oneness. You don't have bigger than, further than, closer than, brighter than. You don't have any of these kind of comparative spectrum-based, semantical contexts, that it makes any sense. But so, and one of the things that I realized with this project, at this point already, when I started thinking about, what is involved with creating the universe, was that a lot of this stuff was actually simpler than people were expecting it to be. And otherwise I wouldn't be able to do it. I'm not claiming to be so smart. And, there are people with far higher IQs than me that I think are quite lost, but it's not because they're not intelligent. It's because we're trapped in relativity, as Eric Weinstein would say, and it's even our semantics are as well. So, and cosmology the idea of cosmology has even changed quite a bit since, the idea where from the time when theology was the narrative, the mainstream narrative within the scientific pursuit, I guess, and that's definitely changed, and it has changed our definition of cosmology. And it's no longer fundamental at all, which I would say isn't really cosmology. It's more like astronomy. And so first, let's look this up. So cosmology. Cosmology. The physical cosmology, the cosmos, the universe, the world, study of, is a branch of physics and metaphysics. Okay, which one? Interesting. They don't really say which one. Say both. Dealing with the nature of the universe in the cosmos. The term cosmology was first used in English in 1656. Okay. Um, Religious or mythological cosmology is a body of beliefs based on mythological, religious, or esoteric literature. See, it's interesting that that they have this word here, which implies kind of falsity and like it's fairy tales, but you have quite a bit of people. There's a divide of people where if you're not a theist, then you're going to be like, okay, this is fairy tales, and so you'll see this included, but then you'll also see this, and what, I don't know. We just need a whole different way of discussing this stuff, but we have wildly different fundamental beliefs right now in the world. So that has probably never been as as widely divided as it is now. So, but this term cosmology basically just means the study of the world, but it's kind of the study of the world as a process, as a living process. Is kind of the cosmos is when we talk about the cosmos, we're not talking about a static thing. Usually, we're talking about the universe, but in a animated context. It's in the context of it evolving, essentially, of it moving. And so then we have this term, and this model that I'm going to go through tonight is my model of just what I call cosmogenesis, which is not a term that I came up with. But it is interesting that it is a term that I hadn't really heard much until I kind of started thinking about what term would be a good term for the model, and then cosmogenesis. So cosmogenesis theory. These theories have enabled us to discover a cosmic genesis, which can be summarized as a single complex sentence. The universe began 14 billion years ago with an emergence of elementary particles in the form of primordial plasma, which quickly morphed into atoms of hydrogen, helium, and lithium. Okay, this part of it is actually not necessarily not fundamental. This is, I would argue, is kind of more fundamental cosmology, is kind of the lineage of atoms as part of fundamental cosmology. But when we say something like primordial plasma, or even, and then especially 14 billion years ago, we're now mixing this fundamental cosmology, which is kind of a lineage-based cosmology, with a space-time relativity cosmology. And they're not the same field. They can be kind of tied, like I said, probably, but they're not the same field. And so what I wanted to do was go beyond that. And in order to think about how the universe was created, you have to think about what existed before the universe. And that implies the belief that there is something before the universe. You can't actually think about cosmogenesis without thinking that there was something before the universe, because if you don't believe that there was something before the universe, then you have no constraints that you can propose that guide you in formulating the necessary process and requirements for that act, essentially. So this is kind of, I think, why our mainstream science has been, struggling with this a bit, is that a lot of people believe that there was nothing before the universe. And I would say that the majority of, or I would say this is the problem, is our terms. It might be right that there was nothing before the universe, But it's not right to say that there was no one before the universe. You have to propose that there was something, but that thing might be someone, but it's not a, I guess this is tough because, like I've said before, my theory divides of sentient singularity theory, it divides the world into things and beings. And beings, you could say, are a type of thing, but not, or all, you could say all beings are things, but you can't say all things are beings because not all things are beings. This pen, not a being. You, a being. Me, a being. Are we things too? Yes, we're also things, but we're also beings. Not a being, but a thing. So there were no things that weren't beings before the universe. And you have to have already arrived at this. There is logical constraints involved with why I believe it is an inevitability that we not only that it is that sentience is fundamental and therefore existence itself must be sentient, if sentience is fundamental, but also why we must assume that this is the case. So these are two different things, and it was interesting. I heard John Vervaeke was discussing kind of this concept with Kurt Mungle on his latest talk that he had with him, and which is very good. I haven't finished it, but I've seen most of it, and it's very good. And he was talking about how we are kind of can only look at the world from within through the perspective of our mind. But I think, and I'd have to watch it again, but we kind of came to slightly different conclusions about like what this entails for how we must approach the world. And I would say that if you can only if it is logically inevitable that you must assume that sentience is the fundamental nature of existence, which you must, because there's nothing truer that you know about existence, then it is sentient, because you and your existence is what you know to be true more so than you know the existence of anything else to be true. Because the truth of anything else's existence, as far as you know, is only based on your own perspective. So it's it's within the context of your own sentience. So, and if I were to say, do you exist? You'd say yes, but if you did not exist, what would that mean? If you died and I said, do you exist still, at least like in the space, in the physical world, you would say, no, I no longer exist. But why would you no longer exist? It's because your sentience no longer exists in this world. I'm not saying that it doesn't persist, but that's for another discussion. And so also, and I'll have to do another specific stream on this, but there's also existence by definition includes all that exists and does not include that which does not exist, which means it is entirely enclosed system, and therefore any information within it is entirely self-referencing, and something that is completely self-referential is self-aware. It just must be. And this is so there's multiple logical reasons why existence, the fundamental nature of existence, probably seems to be that it must be sentient. Yes. And but then also from your own perspective and your own experience, not just through thinking about things logically, you know that from your firsthand experience that sentience is the nature of existence more truly than you know anything else's nature. You're not inside this pen. You don't have a firsthand experience of what it's like to be this pen. I would say that there is no perspective of what it's like to be this pen. But that's a proposal. But I know that I am sentient and you know that you're sentient. If you're you, um, if you are someone, then you know that you are sentient more truly than you know anything else. So you must assume, based on your own personal experience, and I would say it also seems logically inevitable when you think about this from first principles, that existence must be sentient. So if this is the case, then someone always existed. And we can start from there. And if someone always existed, and existence is singular, at least in this primordial sense, I guess, in this initial condition of existence, is that it is a singular existence, which it must be, logically. Existence includes all that exists and therefore is one. We're not talking about multiplicity yet. We're talking about beyond creation. And, one of the things that is written in my abstract of my paper and on my website, and that I've said here before, is that sentience singularity theory proposes that beyond that beyond the beginning, existence is sentient. Sentient existence is sentient. What is it? Oh my gosh! I'm like, I've been dealing with a baby all day. Beyond the beginning, sentience exists. Existence is sentient, and sentience is one. And so this is kind of like this. This is the state, the initial condition that we're starting from, and but when you assume that, now we have some kind of constraints to build from. If you don't assume that, there's no constraints. If you don't believe that there was anything or anyone, which is really what you have to propose, because you can't really propose that there was something before the creation of the universe. If you do that, you could just say, well, there was another universe maybe, but it's like that's just an infinite cycle and you haven't gotten anywhere. And you also have no reason to maybe you have a reason to think that, but you haven't solved the true question that you're trying to get at, which is, how did the cosmos generate? And so that's what we're trying to do. Sound is good. Good evening from Carolina. Good evening. What's up, trusted source? Michael Mack, how's it going? So basically, if existence is one sentient being, let's put ourselves in the perspective of this one sentient being. You're God in this. Just think about being God. I'm not pulling a Leo Gura and saying you are God, but I'm saying let's think about this from the perspective of God. How would you have to create the universe? Not how would you want to, how would you have to? And so what are your constraints? Well, your constraints are your oneness. You are single being, and you're everything that exists. What this causes is a mathematical constraint of quantity that is inherent, and also the constraint that you must create within yourself. Okay? What this entails is that whatever you create has to be smaller, for lack of a better term. What the heck just happened? I don't know if all of you guys just got yeah, you did. You totally saw. I don't know what is going on. Whenever I go like this, am I gonna get like? Did that lead? I don't know. Only that one time. It led to a bunch of like fake confetti falling. I have no idea how that happened. I don't know why either. So, creation has to fit within you, okay? And because you cannot create something that is outside you, because there's nothing outside you. Nothing can exist outside you. You are existence. So anything that is created has to be created within you, and you have to go and follow specific quantitative steps. You can't skip steps. And so this is kind of woven into Stephen Wolfram's work and the work of many others, which is that, oh, and also like assembly theory, and we'll look up the computational irreducibility. So it's called computational irreducibility, the phenomenon that simple rules can cause complex behavior and impede our ability. It impedes our ability to make predictions or apply mathematical equations to understand what will happen, which basically means you have to run the system. You have to do it. You can't just skip steps. And so I don't know if you can hear my daughter, but she's making noises. So that means you have to start from 1. And if you start from 1, let's do this right here. This is the model, okay? And what this is doing, let's just explain this, is it is an equation to test whether or not when you partition yourself, what is left over from the division is smaller than what is been partitioned. So basically, we're trying to make it go through a division process where creation is smaller than creator. That's what needs to happen, essentially. And I'm using smaller for lack of a better term, but it's like lesser than is actually probably a better term. We need creation to be lesser than creator. So you're starting with 1, okay? And if you have 1 and you try and divide yourself by 1, which God is basically partitioning his own beingness in order to partition some of it and make, for the sake of creation, for the sake of making multiplicity, which would be a sentient cosmos, okay? And this partition has to be lesser than him. So if he's 1 and he divides himself by 1, that means he gives all of his energy to creation. He's left over with nothing. This is like Kylo Ren in that last terrible Star Wars movie where he gives all his energy to Rey and brings her back from the dead, and but he dies after that because you can't give all your life to another, being, all of it, and then maintain your own life. So, but what this leads to is nothing. There's no generation of multiplicity at this point, and so what? Yeah, and so there's no creation really. I mean, it's just like this. One has died, another one has been born, but you're still just with 1 the whole time, and so it doesn't work. And so then you try 2. So if you're 1, you divide yourself by 2, give like 50%, half your energy to creation. You're left with half. What this means is that creation and creator have the same value, which means they're I don't want to say the same, use the word size, but like they're the same size in a way, which means one doesn't fit inside the other. Okay, so this doesn't work. And you need also to have more energy for creator than you have put into creation, because creator needs to animate creation. So you need, it's like putting your mask on first when you're on an airplane. Like if you pass out and you're gone, like you can't sustain the being that needs your assistance. So you need to put your mask on first. So you need to have more energy than creation. Part of this stream, by the way, is because I haven't spoken about this model specifically in quite some time. So I'm a little rusty, but we'll see, how it goes. There is, like I said, there is another video that is pretty much closer to when I made the model, but there will also be another much more polished video coming out about it later this year. But this is kind of practice for me, and you guys get to watch my practice. But so there's multiple things happening here. Creator needs more energy than creation requires, because he needs to sustain himself and creation, and it needs to fit within. Okay, it needs to be smaller than. I'm trying not to do the thing again, but maybe it'll do it. I don't know. I have no idea how that I don't know what I did to make the like confetti fall. I can't do it again. But so uh, and you need to go and you need to kind of test this in order. You try one, and or at least conceptually that won't work. Two won't work because creator and creation are the same value, which doesn't work. They're the same size, they require the same energy, and so it just does not work. Then you try three, and you put 1/3 of your energy into creation if you're creator. Now you have stable creation. So this is what this is showing right here. One, you can see here's the equation. It doesn't work. False, because what it's testing is this value on this side that's left over after the division smaller or lesser than, I want to say lesser than this value. And what we need is for this value to be lesser than this value in order to have stability, essentially, and in order for it to follow the logical constraints of a sentient initial existence that is singular. And so you get false here, get false here, and here you get true. And so now 1/3 of your energy or of your being can be put towards creation. What's interesting about this is that it leads to something that's kind of interesting, which is it leads to a symmetry structure that is evident in our standard model and everywhere else, which even in our colors, in our mathematical order of operations, it's this symmetry structure of 3 sets of 2 or 2 sets of 3 that I talk about in that I called like the binary triality before. And so what this is that it is kind of how the mind organizes information. So it's how you organize. Your mind perceives anything and it organizes it into a hierarchy, and it differentiates it. And what this causes is like PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Parentheses, exponentiation, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. 3 sets of 2 or 2 sets of 3. Same thing with when you look at the quarks in the standard model. It's like up and down and charm and strange and truth and beauty quarks. Like that's a binary triality set, or symmetric set, as I have been calling it lately, and which I believe all of this is kind of I believe it's a Calabi-Yau manifold structure, but it's the symmetry structure that's evident in our standard model everywhere. It's in the electrons and neutrinos. You have electrons, muons, and electrons, muons, and taus. Electron, neutrino, muon, neutrino, and tau neutrinos. Then you have the quarks that I just named. So you also even have this in the bosons to some degree, but it's a little bit more tough to see it, and we'll talk about that another day. I think I get that. I think that we don't think about them the correct way, but you can also see this in the colors. Very obvious. You have the 3 primary and the 3 secondary colors. This is evident in your limbs. Even you have legs and feet and toes, and you have arms and hands and fingers. And so anywhere that you look, your mind is breaking this the universe into this pattern. And part of this, I believe, is coming from this initial constraint of creation that causes this symmetry pattern that comes from the fact that 1/3 of God has to put 1/3 of his being into creation, and he's left with 2/3 for himself. So this is a binary structure where it's creator and creation, but it's also has this trialic, this perception of triality built into it as well, that allows for weightedness to exist as well. So it's like if every division between 2 different things did not have this a weightedness in it, then you wouldn't be able to make decisions, because and a decision is always between two options. It's not between three options. It's always between two options, or it's not. It's that if you have more than two options, what it really is that your mind goes through this process of two options, two options, two options, two options. And it just narrows it down. But when you make a decision, it's because one of those options has more value than the other. And so basically this also is built into this. And so it's tough to say that it comes from this. I mean, you could say that, but any of this stuff, it's all kind of like simultaneous. So it's kind of tough to describe. But that is the initial math. And it's so simple. It's super simple. And because you're talking about the beginning of quantities. I know that this sounds like so ridiculously simple, but we're not talking about like looking at light and using the speed of light and then trying to calculate how far away that planet is and within space-time to figure out like how old the universe is. That's not what we're doing. We're trying to figure out where did the universe, why is the universe the way that it is, and where did it come from? But where did it come from isn't even the right question. The right question is, who did it come from? But that question almost answers itself, because it came from the one who always existed, which is God. So you don't even really need to ask the question. And I've talked about this before, is like a lot of these questions that we have that seem difficult to answer, when it's because they're not the right question. And when you ask the right question, it almost answers itself. It's like, who did the universe come from? You really need to even ask that question. Once you've asked it, you know the answer. If the question is correct, if you're assuming that the question is correct, who did the universe come from? Then the answer is God. So we're talking about like the cosmos, not existence, but the cosmos, not just this verse. Even if you believe that that this universe came from another universe and it was, with some lab of grays or something in another preceding aeon, where did that come from? That's the question. I'm not saying that that's correct. I'm just saying, even if you do assume that, you can't that's not an answer to the question that we're trying to ask. You can't answer this with, oh, it came from another universe. Where did that one come from? It's like, eventually you got to get to the starting point, which is one existence. It came from the one existence that eternally existed. And what is the nature of that being? It's a sentient being. So who did the cosmos come from? The question almost answers itself. So this is there's not actually like that much to this model that I have. It's actually quite simple. And I remember like thinking like, oh, I remember I was sitting on the couch and it was like, I don't know, maybe like just after midnight, or maybe it was even earlier than that. It was like midnight around then. It was late, but it wasn't like super late. And this was during like lockdown, so everybody was working from home. And I was just sitting on the couch thinking about listening to a physics podcast, and I was like, what if like, how did God create the universe? And then I was like, there's no way I could understand. There's just no way. It's impossible. And I'm not saying I can understand it all. I'm not God, so there are plenty of things that I cannot get at. But are there things that we can't understand about, like, or at least assume about the constraints of creation? I thought no at first, and then I stopped myself and I was like, well, yeah, if I don't think that I can do it, then of course I can't do it. That's true of everything. And then I was like, but with one thing that I've learned from this process so far, it's that I actually can figure out a lot more than I ever thought was possible, because it's a matter of perspective. It's not a matter of intelligence. And I'm not saying it has nothing to do with intelligence, but it's very much a matter of perspective, whether or not you can perceive what works something out. And it's more about like perceiving. When it comes to fundamentality, it's more about perceiving what is than it is about figuring it out almost. And that's why I said, like, what all I did, I was like, okay, let me assume maybe I can do it. And it's actually like really simple. Let me try and put myself in the perspective of God. Just, I am God, no one else exists, nothing else exists, and now I have to create, what are my constraints? And that's what I mean, is like putting yourself in that perspective allows you to kind of just perceive what would be your constraints. You don't even have to like sit there and get a little like calculator and or use a telescope or anything like that. It's just like, let me perceive what would be my constraints if I kind of just think about this from the perspective of God. And turned out it was not that difficult. And this is at the very beginning. I'm not saying that it doesn't lead to something complicated, especially when you start tying it to space-time. It's going to require calculations. But when you look at my cosmological verse model, it's got this is that cosmogenesis model at the very beginning. And, it just starts with 1. We delete it, and every value disappears. And but if we just start with 1, and you've got this process that kind of kicks in and leads to everything else. So that's the kind of basics of this model. Now you can see here that this is kind of just describing what's happening in certain like parts of the model. That's what these equations are just showing. So it's not actually that complicated, but this is, there's equations built into everything here, but they're very simple equations, and they're just but it starts with the constraints of one existence that must create within itself. And as it does this, it is creating quantities itself. Quantities don't exist yet other than 1. There's just 1 in the beginning. That's like, there is no other math to exist. You have to start with 1 and work from the constraints of that oneness. And so it's pre-mathematical, this model almost. It's like mathematics is generating when you're thinking about fundamental cosmology. And physics, the symmetry patterns that we perceive in physics are generating due to the constraints of creation and of God. God does have constraints. His constraints are his oneness. That is his constraints. And his allness, I guess, all-inclusiveness, like, is that everyone and everything that exists. Gets tough to speak about that kind of thing as like things existing, but fundamentally everyone else has to exist within God, and therefore everything exists within God. There is nothing and no one outside of God. And so that is a fundamental constraint it's a logical constraint that leads to a mathematical constraint that guides the creation of the cosmos. And so, it's funny. I remember Eric Weinstein saying that in his podcast once. He said, people think about God as being all powerful, but we should start thinking about God as being one who's all constrained. And I would say that God is definitely both. He is all powerful because everything is within him and everyone is within him, everyone else. And he has sovereignty and power over everyone within him because he is a higher value. And he is the environment. So if you can how you control others is by controlling their environment as much as you can control others. So we're going to talk about this as well later. And this was another topic that I thought I was going to bring up tonight. And is about morality. I was going to talk about what is morality because there was and I need to do this guy's perspective some justice, make sure that I'm doing it justice. But I'm kind of going to talk about this. But somebody had shared this guy, Parker Crutchfield, and he's a philosophy uh, professor and I guess Western Michigan University, but I think he went to U of A, which is my hometown. And he said morality pills may be the U.S.'s best shot at ending, the coronavirus pandemic. And I don't know, but basically, he his he was saying psychoactive substance could boost your cooperative pro-social behavior, curtailing selfish actions. I think that this is very shallow view of morality, but I don't know everything about what he believes, and I want to contextualize it properly, so we're not going to talk too much about it tonight. Um, but morality doesn't exist without sovereignty and differentiation. If you don't have the ability to make a decision, then there is no you. You're just a machine. Okay? My car has no sovereignty to it. It cannot make decisions on its own. I make decisions. It does not. It has no capacity for moral behavior because it doesn't, and it doesn't have a self because it doesn't have any personal sovereignty to it. So personal sovereignty is a requirement of morality. So basically, from what I had heard, is that he would say, this guy had said that something like we should mandate morality pills, which sounds a lot like, what is that movie? Equilibrium with Christian Bale, I think, where they take those pills that like turn down your emotions and make it so you just comply. And that's, if it's mandated, then it's not moral, And so, but we're going to talk about that a bit because it's relevant to this to the even understanding fundamental cosmology, because that differentiation process that is going on within the context of also being within God does give God all power, but also the fact that you're sovereign means you have the ability to make your own decisions, but he is the environment that you're within, so he has the ability to control the environment. And that is power. It's funny, I have a friend who is also, what I met through this channel, and he is very into dog training, and we talk about dog training quite a bit, or have at least. And what gives you power over dogs is not your physical strength; it's your ability to control their environment. That is what gives you power over dogs, and that's what gives you power, really, over someone else as much as you can. Because as soon as you remove their personal sovereignty and ability to make decisions, then they don't exist anymore. But you can have power over their environment, and that gives you as much power as you can have without actually just destroying their sovereignty, which that almost removes your power. You don't have power over someone else at that point. There is no someone else. I don't have power over the someone that is my car. My car is a tool that I have. It's not. But whereas, like, I do have power over my dog because I control their environment. Once my dog snuck and climbed up on my counter and ate an entire loaf of banana bread, including the saran wrap, and that was, an expensive vet bill for me. So I installed a gate that prevents her from getting the saran wrap now, and that's power over her. But it didn't, give her some pill that makes her not able to make decisions anymore. She can make decisions. Dogs make decisions. Every sentient being makes decisions, even if it's an atom. and it is sentient. It makes decisions, but that's a whole topic for another time. But yeah, so the idea of being all powerful is not in contrast with the idea of being all constrained. Power is a whether or not someone has power in in a certain relationship is within the context of that relationship. It doesn't mean that there is no constraints. And but interesting is that if you don't think about this in terms of constraints, then you can't actually create a model of the cosmos that is that. But if you do think about this from the perspective of the right initial constraints, it seems like there's only one way to make the cosmos. And what is this? The geometric unity paper. Where is that? Hold on. File, new window. Geometric unity. Where is it? Here. Papers. Come on. Okay, here. Eric Weinstein had this quote by, where is it? What really interests me is whether God had any choice in the creation of the world. What's interesting is that from what I've seen, it seems like God had to choose to create because oneness is the default. And that means that to create multiplicity, which is creation, that's what it is, fundamental creation is the creation of multiplicity, you have to go against your nature of oneness. Because the nature of existence is by definition oneness. Existence includes all that exists, so therefore, by definition, it is one. So God's nature is oneness. He has to go against his nature in order to do that which is different. He has to do something different, and to differentiate is something different to God than his nature initially. So he has to go against his nature. Going against your nature is a choice that only sentient beings can make, and that means creation had to be a choice. But what does also seem to be the case is that God had no choice. It seems to be from the perspective of somebody who's inside this cosmological verse, inside creation, trying to think about it from the perspective of God as best I can, while not being God. It seems like he had no choice in what the rules were, the general rules. I'm not saying he can't break them in certain instances, and change something. I actually think he can, but I think that in order to create a meaningful universe or a meaningful creation, which means creating someone else, there is mathematical constraints to that, and also to him, that guide that process and make it so that there's only one way to make a universe, it seems. But it also seems like it had to be a choice. And this is what I mean by it's this superposition between all powerful and also all constrained. All constrained in the rules that must be followed of the logic of creation. Because logic is, logic, and God is constrained by himself. And also all powerful in the decision whether or not to even make someone else. God didn't have to make the universe. And this quote by Albert Einstein, what really interests me is whether or not God had any choice in the creation of the world. I don't know what he meant by that. If he meant, did he have a choice in whether or not to create, or did he mean, did he have any choice in how? Because it doesn't seem to me like he had a choice in how, but it does seem like he had to choose in order to do it. And that is all powerful and also all constrained simultaneously. It's interesting. But you have to think about this stuff. This is what I mean by like the context of physics is theism. It has to be, because you have to presuppose constraints that exist beyond creation, beyond the creation of the cosmos, in order to even start to conceptualize how the creation of the cosmos. And if you don't presuppose that there was any the one before the cosmos, then you can't actually have constraints, because it is that oneness that is the constraint. There is some one beyond the beginning, not just stuff. There's some one. That oneness is the constraint. You can't just assume that there's stuff before stuff. That doesn't make any sense. And so that's why you get locked into this like logic loop of many worlds or something like that, because which doesn't actually answer anything. Like, well, where did the universe come from? Maybe it came from another universe. Okay. Where did all the universes come from? Where did everything that we see come from? Where did every one that we know other than God come from? That's the question. And you can't get an answer without, the constraint of oneness. So some one existed prior to multiplicity. And it's interesting that it's even built into the semantics. It's like inescapable. That's what I mean by these questions. Like they answer themselves almost when you have the right one. Interesting that it even says that, and even saying that. This is like John Vervaeke was talking about this to Kurt Mungle too. It's like when you're looking at yourself, looking at the world. It's like you start like examining. You're not just seeing red and yellow and green and blue and purple and orange. You're like looking at the symmetry pattern of the primary and secondary colors that you're perceiving, and you're looking at where they are and why they are the way that they are. Why are plants green? Why is the sky blue? Why is fire this color? And from a metaphysical sense, not just a physical sense. And because you have to understand, you have to look at the metaphysics in order to understand what is responsible for the physics that we see. We have to kind of understand the metaphysical context of it, which is sentience, which implies that theism is the context, monotheism specifically, which is the only real theism, is the context of physics. It's like it seems like it has to be. I don't want to say that maybe I'm wrong, but I mean it's possible, of course. But I mean I don't know if it's possible. Actually, that's the thing. It's like everybody wants to say that, but I actually don't think it's possible for that to be wrong. Just to be honest, like I've said on here before. Once somebody said, Tyler, what would imply if your theory was wrong and that sentience was not fundamental, and that there wasn't an initial sentient being that is responsible for and containing of all other sentient beings? What if that wasn't true? What would that mean? And I took a whole day to think about it, because I was like, I need to make sure that I'm like thorough. And my answer back was like, I'm pretty sure that it means like none of us could even exist to think about it. And if that's the case, then like it doesn't seem like it's possible for that to not be the case. And that means that is like a humble position to take. It's not like if it's honest. Because I also recognize it's inconvenient. And I said that to that guy that asked me that question. I was like, I know that this answer is going to sound very inconvenient. And because it's almost like it sounds like it's saying, and it is in a way saying, if we're being honest, we're being humble, is saying if that if I'm wrong, we wouldn't even be here to ask the question. So it's basically saying, in the context of us asking this question, it seems like it can't be wrong. That's an inciting statement, of course, um, which is not the goal of my life, or at least of this project. It's not the goal of my life either. Um, uh, I grew out of that phase of trying to incite people all the time on social media years ago. Um, but uh, yeah, I recognize that it's kind of inconvenient, and it sounds the opposite of what it is. It sounds not humble, even though it is. But that's because, like I've said before, humility is misunderstood. Humility is just honesty with oneself about oneself. Not it's not like self-degradation. That's not what it is. That's fake humility. And it's the opposite, and I would say it's almost the opposite of humility, is to do something like that, because it's usually done with the purpose of achieving some kind of personal goal. It's like, degrading yourself is usually, whether that's to God or that's to some other human being, it's like it's usually for the sake of some selfish personal goal, like seeming less than. It's funny. I remember as a kid, it was very sudden almost. It was, and I feel like it had when I was probably like in high school sometime. All of a sudden, it seemed like the culture became trying to seem like you were, like you didn't want to seem like you came from advantage. You didn't want to be like, oh, I came from money, and yeah, my dad, gifted me my first company or something like that, or whatever. You wanted to be like, I came from nothing, and I'm, my family didn't have anything growing up, and it's for the sake of actually framing yourself as like this powerful being that can overcome. It's a selfish, non-humble thing to do. Is to like degrade your origins. And I remember thinking about this, and all of a sudden, all the people around me, this just became like the trend, is to like downplay, your family's situation that you came from, whatever that may be, personally or financially or whatever. Um, and that was not always the case. If you look throughout history, it was very often like it was the opposite. It was like you wanted people, if you were wealthy, you wanted people to know, or you even if you didn't have, if you were going through financial hardship, like you didn't want people to know about it. And uh, but now then sometime around like when I was in high school, that whole thing changed. It's not humble. It's like, I think it's because of media, like social media and the accessibility of media, and also like the politics of the times that started. It was like, everybody wants to be David up against the Goliath. And but that's because but the thing is to want to be that is not humble, because to want to be that is to want to be powerful beyond your what people perceive you as, which is the opposite of humility. It's very interesting. But yeah, side tangent as usual. What's up, memes of destruction? Heavy equipment. Nice to see you on here live. Rana Art. Um, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Well, that makes sense. Us having the veil means God puts the veil in itself as well, at least the part of itself that is us. Um, Three awarenesses: my awareness speaking, your awareness listening, and awareness as a separate entity being aware of our awareness. Yeah. I've thought awareness is always Trinity, no matter how many people you are talking to. The Trinities overlap: one speaker, one listener, one God. Yeah, it's tough because what if it's just, I mean, in some ways that's true. It's like even a marriage structure. It's like in a marriage, it's there's three entities, but it's almost like there's four entities. It's like me, my wife, God, and our marriage as an entity in and of itself. And then like God outside of it, which is inside, outside, separate, and oneness. You know, and it's but it's like two overlapping threes. Where it's if you look at this model of relationships that I have on my, you go to my website, you go to models. The dimensions of maneuvering, which I basically think this is the observerse, but I don't want to steal Eric Weinstein's term. It's a term that he came up with, and I actually like the term a lot. I think that this is related to what he calls the observerse because of just the symmetry structure leading to certain quantities that you can see here. 14-dimensional observerse, as he talks about and as part of geometric unity. But this is like the metaphysics, I believe, of the observerse that he's talking about. I'm not saying that this is exactly how he would describe it. I don't think so, but it's, I think, the metaphysics responsible for the structure that he's talking about. And it's that there's this four overlapping with four, and this four below is actually inside of the four above, because you perceive the world as inside, outside, separate, and oneness. You're a 4D manifold. Inside of a 4D manifold, which is a mind within a mind, you within God. And within that, there's this 2 degrees of freedom, positive degree, negative degree, plus a subjective constraint, plus an objective constraint. And so this manifests in space-time, which is space-time overlapping, but it's like fundamental space-time, which is not length with height. It's like past, it's within time, it's past moment, present moment, future moment. And then space is the objective constraint, because God is space, or the universe, sentient creation, is space. So it can't maneuver within space. It is space. It maneuvers space itself. You are within space, and you maneuver. You are subject. You perceive that spinning animated structure as time. It's like you're in a flow that you don't have control over, and you're kind of going with the flow, and you're subject to it. God has control over us because he of essentially time, but it's our objective constraint, whereas God's objective constraint would be space, because he is space. Our objective constraint is time, because we're subject to it. God is subject to himself. That's it. And then when it comes to maneuvering within space, you have new location, current location, and previous location. What this is really, it's within the context of a goal. So, but this overlap that you have here is that there's three overlapping in how we interact. You can maneuver in space, God maneuvers in time. You maneuver in space, God maneuvers in time. You maneuver in space, God maneuvers in time. And you can't maneuver in time. God can't maneuver in space. He maneuvers because he is space, and you can't maneuver in time because you're subject to it. So there's this overlapping two sets of four that overlap three dimensions of that is responsible for this like binary triality symmetry structure as well, or that is where you also perceive this binary triality symmetry structure, which is what we also see in that constraint of creation, where you have creator and creation. It's a binary, but also there's a 2/3, 1/3 relationship of weighted, or I guess weightedness of value between the two, and it's probably could be much better described than I'm doing right now, but um, yeah. I'm we are probably moving soon, and so my life has been a little bit, my time has been a bit limited, and my and unpredictable. So I do appreciate people's just grace as we go through this, but so eventually some things might change as far as the studio, but if they do, then they hopefully I mean, I would assume that it improves a bit. Um, but I think next week might be my last stream for maybe a couple weeks. We might have to take a break. We'll see. But I'll still probably have things that are released every week um, on this. Um, but yeah, we'll get back into it pretty soon and more in a more organized fashion. And I do have more um, produced content coming out about this. But if you would like to know more about what I'm talking about in this episode, this is the video that I would suggest checking out. If you go to Theory of Everyone, go here and go to videos and go all the way to the beginning. Go to, where is it? This one right here. And this video, I will change the thumbnail probably, something better. But I thought it was a different thumbnail than this. But this one has, and I get into this model a bit more that we're talking about tonight. So, and all of this stuff, I talk about this pattern of a 3 sets of 2 or 2 sets of 3 everywhere. You can see here, and you can see that I get into this model a bit more. So if you'd like to know a bit more about this and see a more polished, I guess, stream about it, I highly suggest watching that. It was not live either, so it was a bit more polished. But also just keep in mind, this was also done 4 years ago. Wow, that's crazy. Time flies, man. But so the terminology that I use is not as developed yet as it is currently, and it's being developed a lot this year because of the paper that I'm working on. Kind of has forced even it has accelerated. I don't want to say forced. It has accelerated the linguistic development of how I describe these ideas and concepts and things like that. But yeah, that is there. I suppose this is part of it, the process. Very cool. Yes, makes sense. Part of the mechanism of being separate makes beings made of an individual being. Yep. I suppose. Yeah, it's been a while. Heavy equipment. What's up? This is part of the process. So being like this, that Trinity is how we perceiving ourselves. Yeah, in a way that's true. It is part. It's built into the structure of perception. It's like built into the mental process of perception. That trialic or Trinitarian viewpoint, and and it's also built into the logical constraints of creation at the same time. So it's fascinating to see. But yeah, that stream, Sentient Singularity Theory 42 in Creation, or that video, it's not a stream, goes into more detail about what I was kind of getting at tonight. But there will be more discussion about this in the future. Let's see if anybody has any final questions, and then I'm probably going to call it. It's going to be a pretty quick stream tonight. And I appreciate everybody on here. Please hit the like button if you are watching. It helps fuel the algorithm. Share this if you found it, meaningful or valuable. Also, if you do watch Sentient Singularity Theory 42 and Creation, that video from 4 years ago, and you find that valuable and meaningful, please share that as well. Last week's stream was very good. I really have been appreciating these kind of like working sessions. That one was even more of a working session. This one was kind of just like going over some old work more so than it was a working session. But the past few have been working sessions, but especially the last one. We didn't even end, on the last one, come up with the answer. We did come up with a framework of, an outline of the fields, but it's this is interesting actually. Like here, this is kind of fascinating. I'll just show you guys this. So if you watch the last stream, I went over like what are the fundamental different fields and how we should organize like a periodic table of fields and understand the fields of study in science. And I had plugged into like Midjourney, like periodic table of fields of academic fields or something like that, and to get an image for the thumbnail. And years ago, when we went over it though in the stream, I was showing that we were looking at this periodicity in of sentience, essentially, where like an atom is an assembly of hadrons, a molecule is an assembly of atoms, a cell is an assembly of molecules, etc. This periodicity. And years ago, I noticed that the quantity lined up with like the menorah, and because I was thinking about like the tree of light in the Christmas tree, and the menorah is also like a tree of light, and this comes around the same time of year, and it seemed like they also kind of metaphysically would symbolize like the tree of life, in which this, if sentience is life, this is like the tree of life. And so it kind of lined up that those were there. And so I had just like put it into that once years ago. But when I had asked and I was looking at fields to line up with these last week, when I asked Midjourney to make a periodic table of fields, this is what it created. Isn't that fascinating? It just, it looks, and I didn't notice it till after the stream that we did. And I was like, wow, that looks like this. It's like very interesting. Obviously there's some differences, but yeah, fascinating. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, fascinating. I didn't even notice that until after the stream. I thought that was kind of cool. But highly recommend that stream if you watch it. But I liked that a lot. It was a lot of fun. We didn't even come up with like the answer, but we definitely made a lot of progress on it, and that was like, it was cool to do a stream like that. But there will also be more produced content on things like this model of cosmogenesis. But if you'd like to see an older produced video about it, like I said, go back to one of the early videos called Sentient Singularity Theory 42 in Creation, and I explain quite a bit in there. But with that, good night, everybody, and I will see you next week. Peace.